The plane buzzed with activity as passengers stowed their bags. Emma Carter, a rule-following flight attendant, gave her usual rehearsed smile to the elderly man in a baseball cap. "Apologies, sir, but we can't serve drinks before takeoff." She didn't notice the pilot emerging from the cockpit behind her, his face stern. "Emma, my office, now." Her blood turned cold. Denying that water wasn't just a mistake, it was career suicide. And in 240 seconds, she'd learn why. Before we get into today's story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. If you love stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Now, let's get started. Emma's breath caught in her throat as the weight of the pilot's words sank in. "My office, now." The cabin, once a hum of casual conversations and the rustling of carry-ons, felt eerily still. The scent of coffee from first class mixed with the faint, sterile odor of the aircraft's recycled air. She could hear the distant beeping of an overhead compartment being forced shut, but everything else blurred into white noise. Her hands trembled as she smoothed the front of her uniform, her mind racing. What just happened? She had followed protocol. She always followed protocol. Denying drinks before takeoff was standard procedure. So, why did it feel like the walls were closing in? Emma's eyes darted back toward the man in the baseball cap. He was still seated, his expression unreadable. A few passengers whispered, some casting glances in her direction. One of the first-class attendants stood frozen near the galley, wide-eyed. A prickling heat crept up Emma's neck. She swallowed hard and turned toward the cockpit, her legs feeling heavier with each step. The polished floor beneath her shoes felt unusually cold, and a thin layer of sweat gathered at the nape of her neck. This is bad. She replayed the moment over in her head. His voice, his request, her response. Had she been rude? Too curt? No, she had been professional. So why was the pilot summoning her like a schoolgirl caught passing notes in class? A lump formed in her throat as she reached the cockpit door. She could feel the weight of the passenger's stares pressing against her back. With a shaky inhale, she stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind Emma, sealing her in the cramped cockpit office with Captain Harris. The air inside felt heavier, thick with an unspoken tension that wrapped around her like a vice. The pilot, a tall man with graying temples and piercing blue eyes, leaned against the small desk, arms crossed. His gaze pinned her in place. "Emma," he said, his voice steady but firm. "Do you realize what you just did?" Her throat went dry. She forced herself to stand straight, gripping her hands together in front of her. "Sir, I was following protocol. We're not supposed to serve drinks before takeoff." Captain Harris let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. "That man," he pointed toward the closed door, his tone tight with restrained disbelief, "is Clint Eastwood." The words barely registered at first. Emma blinked, her brain struggling to catch up. Clint Eastwood? The name sounded distant, like an echo in a tunnel. She swallowed hard. I didn't recognize him," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Captain Harris's jaw tensed. "Well, the rest of the world does. And let me tell you something, Emma. When someone like him asks for a simple glass of water, you don't refuse." A heavy silence followed, pressing down on her chest. Her stomach twisted as realization crashed into her like a tidal wave. The gasps, the stares, the whispers from the passengers. It all made sense now. "But it was just water," she said, her voice thin with disbelief. "Surely he won't—" "He's not the one you need to worry about," Harris cut in, his tone laced with frustration. "The airline's executives adore him. They've flown him first class on private charters before. The second someone recognizes what just happened, it's going viral. You humiliated a Hollywood legend over a sip of water. Do you understand what that means?" Emma's breath came shallow. Her mind raced. This couldn't be happening. How could such a small, insignificant moment spiral so fast? "I didn't mean any disrespect," she said, desperate now. "I was just—" "It doesn't matter what you meant," Captain Harris snapped. He ran a hand down his face, exhaling sharply before pinning her with a final, resolute stare. "Emma, I don't have a choice. I just got word from corporate." A pause. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. Word about what? The captain sighed, standing upright. His next words landed like a gut punch. "You're being terminated, effective immediately." The room tilted. The floor felt like it had vanished beneath her feet. Fired? Over a glass of water? Her world had just shattered in 4 minutes flat. Emma's breath hitched. She stood frozen, gripping the edge of her uniform as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. "You're being terminated. Effective immediately." The words echoed in her mind, bouncing around like a rubber ball in a glass cage, each repetition hitting harder than the last. This is a mistake," she stammered, her voice shaking. "Captain, I was following company policy. You know that." Harris exhaled sharply, his patience thinning. "Emma, it doesn't matter what the rulebook says. This is about perception. You denied Clint Eastwood a basic request in front of a plane full of passengers. People are already talking. By the time we land, this will be all over social media." Emma's stomach twisted painfully. The absurdity of it all clawed at her chest. How could something so minor, something she had done 100 times before, suddenly be a career-ending offense? "Captain, please," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I've worked for this airline for 6 years. I've never had a single complaint against me. I do my job by the book. You know that." Harris's eyes softened for just a second before he shook his head. "That's the problem, Emma. You followed the book instead of reading the room." A lump formed in her throat. Read the room? Wasn't that what got people fired? If she bent the rules for one passenger and someone else complained, wouldn't she be the one in trouble then, too? "This isn't fair," she whispered. "Life's not fair," Harris replied, his voice edged with something between regret and exasperation. "And in this industry, perception is everything." Emma clenched her fists at her sides, trying to steady her breathing. She thought of the bills waiting for her at home, the rent due next week, the sacrifices she had made to keep this job, the long shifts, the exhaustion, the missed holidays. Had it all been for nothing? A sharp knock on the cockpit door made both of them turn. A junior flight attendant, Kara, peeked in, her face pale. "Captain, we have a situation," she said nervously. Harris sighed, rubbing his temples. "What now?" Kara hesitated, glancing at Emma before speaking. "A first-class passenger just posted about what happened, and it's blowing up. The airline's PR team has already been notified. Emma's blood ran cold. It's already happening." "What did they say?" Harris asked, his voice tight. Kara swallowed. "The Post says, just witnessed a flight attendant refuse Clint Eastwood a glass of water. He didn't even make a fuss about it, but the way she dismissed him? Wow, unbelievable. What happened to basic respect?" Emma's heart pounded. Harris closed his eyes for a moment, then turned to Emma. "Do you see what I mean now? Even if you didn't mean to be rude, that's how it looked, and that's all that matters." Emma felt lightheaded. This wasn't just about Eastwood anymore. It was about public perception, about the speed of outrage, about how a few words typed on a phone could destroy a career in minutes. "I'll apologize," she blurted. "I'll go to him right now and explain." "It's too late," Harris cut in. "Corporate already made their decision. The higher-ups don't want a scandal. They want damage control." Emma's jaw clenched as frustration boiled inside her. Damage control? What about her? What about the damage this was doing to her life? "Captain, if you fire me over this, what kind of message does that send?" she asked, her voice trembling. "That flight attendants should ignore company policy just to avoid bad press? That celebrities get special treatment while the rest of the passengers don't?" Harris stared at her for a long moment. For the first time, he didn't have an immediate response. But before he could speak, another knock came at the door. This time, it was the lead flight attendant, Marina. She looked tense. "Captain, Mr. Eastwood wants to speak with you," she said. "Right now." Emma's pulse spiked. Harris nodded. "I'll handle it." But as he stepped forward, Marina hesitated. Actually, he asked for Emma too. A shiver ran down Emma's spine. The next few minutes would decide her fate. Emma followed Captain Harris down the aisle, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it over the low hum of the aircraft. Passengers stole glances at her, their eyes flickering with curiosity, some with judgment. The weight of their stares pressed against her skin, making the already cramped space feel suffocating. As they neared the first-class section, she spotted him, the man she had unknowingly refused just minutes ago. Clint Eastwood sat in his plush seat, his face unreadable. His iconic squint locked onto her, and for a moment, she felt like she was standing in one of his old westerns, facing down the legendary gunslinger in a high-stakes duel. Harris cleared his throat. "Mr. Eastwood, I want to personally apologize for—" Clint held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "I don't need an apology from you," he said in a voice that was calm, steady, commanding. Then he turned his gaze to Emma. "I need to hear from her." Emma's throat tightened. She had rehearsed a dozen apologies in her head, but now that she was standing in front of him, they all felt wrong, forced. She took a shaky breath. "Mr. Eastwood, I didn't recognize you," she admitted, her voice quieter than she intended. "But that shouldn't matter. I wasn't trying to be rude. I was just following airline policy." His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened. He leaned forward slightly. "And do you believe that policy is always right?" The question hit her harder than she expected. Emma hesitated. Of course she believed in following the rules. Hadn't that been drilled into her from day one? Policies existed for a reason. They kept order, prevented chaos. She had spent years perfecting the art of being the perfect flight attendant, memorizing every protocol to avoid mistakes. But where had that gotten her? Here she was, moments away from losing her job, not because she broke a rule, but because she followed one too closely. Her hands clenched at her sides. "No," she said finally, her voice steadier now. "Not always." For the first time, a small smile tugged at the corner of Eastwood's lips. "Good answer." Emma blinked, caught off guard. He leaned back in his seat. "Let me tell you something. I've been in this business a long time. I've met people who follow the rules so rigidly, they forget to think for themselves. And I've met people who bend the rules so much, they forget why they existed in the first place. The ones who last, they know when to do both." Emma swallowed. She had never thought of it that way. "I wasn't offended, kid," Clint continued, "but I saw the look on your face when the captain called you in. You weren't worried about me. You were worried about losing everything you worked for. Am I right?" Emma's breath hitched. She gave a small nod. Clint nodded back. "Thought so." He turned to Captain Harris. "Now, tell me, what exactly did corporate say?" Harris hesitated. "They, decided to let Emma go, sir." Clint raised an eyebrow. "For what? Doing her job?" His voice had an edge now, a quiet authority that demanded attention. Harris cleared his throat. "It's more complicated than that." "Not really," Clint said, his tone firm. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. "Guess I'll have to make a few calls." Emma's eyes widened. Harris stiffened. "I've flown with this airline for years," Clint continued, tapping on his screen. "Made a lot of good memories. Would be a shame if I had to start flying private instead." The threat hung in the air, unspoken but deafening. Harris exhaled sharply. "Sir, that won't be necessary." Clint looked back at Emma. "You want to keep your job?" She nodded, barely able to breathe. He smiled. "Then you just did." Emma stood frozen, barely processing what had just happened. Clint Eastwood, one of the most legendary actors of all time, had just stepped in to save her job. The tension in her chest, which had felt like a steel band tightening with every passing second, finally loosened. Captain Harris shifted uncomfortably, rubbing his temples as he weighed his options. His expression was unreadable, but Emma could tell he was calculating the damage control. After a long pause, he sighed. "Emma, it looks like you're staying." Emma's knees nearly buckled. Relief flooded her veins, but it was quickly followed by another feeling. Uncertainty. Was she actually safe? Or would this incident haunt her every shift moving forward? "Thank you, sir," she said cautiously, her voice still laced with disbelief. Clint Eastwood chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Don't thank me, kid. I just did what they should have done. Used a little common sense." He turned back to Harris. "If I had made a scene, if I had demanded special treatment, then sure, maybe she deserved some discipline. But all I did was ask for water. She wasn't rude, she wasn't dismissive. She was doing what she was trained to do." Harris inhaled deeply, nodding slowly. "Understood, sir." Emma couldn't help but notice how quickly his demeanor shifted now that Clint was involved. If a regular passenger had complained, would she still be out of a job right now? The thought made her stomach twist. Clint turned back to her, his expression softer now. "You all right?" Emma exhaled, steadying herself. "I think so." He smiled. "Good, because I've got a feeling you're going to be a little famous by the time this flight lands." Emma's eyes widened. "What?" Kara, the junior flight attendant, stepped forward, holding up her phone. "It's already happening," she whispered. Emma glanced at the screen, and her breath caught. The post from the first-class passenger had gone viral. Thousands of likes, hundreds of comments, people were debating fiercely in the replies. Some were furious on her behalf, calling out the airline for their knee-jerk reaction. Others were discussing whether policies should always be followed or if exceptions should be made based on circumstance. And then there was the biggest shock of all. A new post from Clint Eastwood himself. It was a simple message. "Respect goes both ways. A good employee shouldn't be punished for doing their job. Let's do better." Emma's hands trembled as she stared at the screen. Clint Eastwood just defended me. Publicly. Her world was shifting before her eyes. Harris saw it too. His expression darkened slightly, realizing the airline had made a major misstep. "Emma, when we land, we'll have a meeting with corporate. I imagine they'll want to discuss how to, handle this." Emma nodded, still in shock. Clint stood up, stretching slightly. "I think they should be discussing how to thank her," he said pointedly. Harris forced a tight smile. "Of course, sir." As Clint prepared to return to his seat, he paused and gave Emma one last look. "Remember what I said, kid. Rules matter, but so does knowing when to think for yourself." Emma swallowed hard. "I'll remember." With that, Clint gave her a nod and settled back into his seat. Emma exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. The relief of keeping her job was overshadowed by something bigger, a realization. For years, she had believed that playing by the book was the safest way to succeed, that as long as she followed protocol, she'd be protected. But now, she saw the truth. Rules alone didn't shield her. Situations, perceptions, and power dictated more than policy ever could. She glanced around at the other passengers, some whispering, others scrolling on their phones, waiting for the next update in this unexpected mid-flight drama. Her job was safe. For now. But one thing was clear. She would never see her career the same way again. As the plane continued cruising through the sky, Emma returned to her post near the galley, her mind still spinning. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off, leaving her with a strange mix of exhaustion and clarity. She had almost lost everything today, not because she had broken a rule, but because she had followed one too rigidly. The realization was unsettling, but it also sparked something new inside her, a determination to never let blind obedience put her in that position again. Kara approached her, eyes still wide with shock. "Emma, you do realize this is going to be all over the news, right?" she whispered. Emma let out a small, almost disbelieving laugh. "Yeah, I'm starting to get that." Kara hesitated before lowering her voice. "Are you scared?" Emma thought about it for a moment. A few hours ago, the idea of being in the spotlight, of standing out in any way, would have terrified her. She had always prided herself on blending in, following the rules, keeping things smooth and professional. But now, she glanced toward first class where Clint Eastwood was flipping through a magazine, completely unfazed by the chaos he had just stirred on her behalf. No, she wasn't scared, not anymore. She smiled at Kara, the answer coming easily now. "Number, I think I'm ready for whatever comes next." At that moment, a passenger from economy class walked up hesitantly, clearing his throat. "Miss? I saw what happened earlier. Just wanted to say, I think you handled it with a lot of grace." Emma blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, thank you." The man smiled. "It's nice to see someone with integrity. I'll be writing the airline about this. They need to know how unfair that was." Emma felt a warmth spread in her chest. Just hours ago, she had been terrified of losing her job. Now, strangers were standing up for her. As the passenger returned to his seat, Emma exhaled, standing a little taller. She wasn't just a rule follower anymore. She was someone who understood the why behind those rules, and when to question them. The intercom crackled, signaling their descent. The journey was almost over, but for Emma, a new one was just beginning. And for the first time in her career, she wasn't afraid to take control of her own story. As Emma's journey took a surprising turn, we're reminded of how often we face the pressure to conform, whether to policies, expectations, or even our own fears. Sometimes, following the rules is essential, but other times, it's about knowing when to trust your instincts and stand up for what's right. What would you have done in Emma's shoes? Would you have followed the rules, or would you have made a different decision? The story isn't just about a flight attendant or a celebrity encounter. It's about the balance between obedience and courage, and the consequences of both. So, next time you're faced with a decision, ask yourself, are you following the rule, or are you following your heart? Share your thoughts below, and let's discuss how these moments of conflict shape who we become. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the most unexpected twists in life lead to the biggest transformations.